Morning, everybody. I think it's live now, right? I'm still waiting. It says going live. All right. Whoa. Try again. What's going on? Oh, I think it's working. Good morning, everybody. I was showing that it wasn't working, but all right. It's June 2nd, Tuesday, and I guess I'll just update you with some news about like moving forward. I'm sure you guys all got the email. So that there's like the final assignment. What I really want you guys to do, obviously like the everything, but the self assessment is pretty important because I really want you guys to evaluate on what you guys think about this year. Obviously, it's been very different because it's all like remote learning and we're just sort of learning as we go. But go through that list and just really evaluate how much you understand. Be honest, be truthful, and at the end of the self-assessment, give yourself a grade. Give yourself give yourself a mark, and whatever you think that what you think you deserve, right, based on your evaluation on your understanding. So yeah, so do that and provide a short rationale about it. I can tell you that there is one class that I took in university where it was a group project. So this is not about like it doesn't completely relate to us, but our mark was really just based on our self-assessment. So with this group project, there was me and my partner, and we wrote a paper together. We presented, and at the end, we actually had to both of us sit in front of the prof and defend the mark that we get, and then and then you have to sort of decide, if your partner should deserve that grade or if you should be. And this is all in front of the prof. So this self-assessment is all solely on you. So it's just all on you. But just tell me what you think, what you have understood, because like I said, because I'm sitting in front of a computer, I never see you guys. I don't know how much you have been doing or how much you understand the stuff that we've been doing. So tell me what you think, and yeah, that's great. Um, and then the final assessment or final project here is that I know you guys have about like 2-ish weeks. What it really is, I know it seems kind of daunting to think that wow, you have 2 weeks to do this. What I really want you guys to do is that I want you to just focus on the big picture of this, as in like over the course of this year in biology. Not like if you take COVID out. This is what I usually do for my bio class, anyways. Is that how can you link all of the stuff that we have talked about, right? I want you guys to focus on that big picture, right? And and like design something, make something, write something about like, hey, what did we learn, right? So in the email and an assignment, it said that we talked about like your DNA structure, right? That's what we started off with, and then we talked about like the genetics, about like passing on genes and all of that, right? Doing Punnett squares, and then we talked about evolution, and that led us to the biodiversity as what you can see in front of your screen, right? So this sort of year-end project is so open that I just want you guys to create a theme. If you want to write about like, one example is like COVID-19 coronavirus, do that, right? Maybe write about like the impact of it, and then for every one of those, talk about the background, right? About what's a virus, what's a vaccine. Or if you're into plants, write about plants and how like there's an evolution of plants, looking at the genetics of plants, and then eventually looking at like how plants impact maybe humans or other organisms or different relationships, right? So like this year-end project, I don't want you guys to like, this is what I don't want you to do, is that I don't want you to go through that list of concepts and just like 1, 2, 3, 4 and all the way to 20, and then just define or answer all 20 of them. I want you to focus in that big picture, and I want you to look at like a sort of a combination sort of a assignment or product. Okay, so it's really open-ended. You can hand in however you want. So if you want to do like a video, you can do a vlog, you can do a journal, you want to do like I don't know, a website, whatever you want. As long as you're demonstrating that, I'm totally okay with that. And then really at the end of that project, give yourself a grade. Like, how much do you think your product is worth, according to you? And I think that's really, you know, it's sometimes it's interesting because like a lot of the classes I've taken, I had to do self-assessment about like, hey, how much time did I put in, how much effort did I put in, how much did I understand the concepts, and then if you think you got 10 out of 10 or whatever, then put 10 out of 10, right? If you think it's like an 85, put 85, right? That's really based on your evaluation, okay? And I guess like for like this week and next week, things are going to be a little bit different. Like, this is the only time I can do like a live stream, and I decided to do this on YouTube because I know a lot of people aren't really tuning on Teams, so I want it to be recorded so they can watch it after, especially if I'm talking about the final assignment. But Thursday, like I said in the email, we won't have a class because we're delivering your grad signs. So I'm sure you guys all have gotten an email about that. So on Tuesday, you guys are all going to get your signs delivered. And I think next week we're starting to plan your grad. So like sometimes I might be at school, so I might not have this sort of setup to do the classes. It's just such a weird time right now because yeah, like my kids are at daycare and I'm actually home alone today, but not for the next 2 days, and because they will be at home. And then yeah, it's such a strange time about like being at work or not. But Owen, you had a question. Does it say today? I think I just gotta change the due date, so don't worry about it. I just really need it to be due by the 17th. Okay, that's the absolute deadline because I need to get all of your marks because this is a grade 12 class by Friday. So I don't foresee any challenges of that. I think it's for us as your teachers is that the report card comments are a little bit different because of COVID. So that we have to figure out, but I think for the most part marks are really either relatively the same for the ones who haven't been here, and then ones who have been here, I think the marks will change, but really evaluate on your understanding and let me know, and then we'll do that. How much should we do about today besides, yeah, like I said, yeah, it's not due today. I don't know. I guess I forgot to change the due date. I was just busy uploading. But that's really it, okay? If you have any questions, let me know. Ask on the chat if you want. One cool thing is that I noticed that some of you did manage to identify some trees. The picture on my thumbnail for this one was really a picture that I took. And I was telling you that, hey, like trees are... you know, I'm not that familiar with trees. I never went tree planting as like some of my friends did, but like I actually did use a tree guide, and yeah, I identified the trees in my backyard, which was really cool because I never knew I had like 3 or 4 green spruce in my backyard, and then I have like a Manitoba maple, which was like the thumbnail that I had on YouTube, and then I had I think a white pine as well. So it's pretty cool. Like seriously, survey your backyard if you have trees or your neighborhood. There is actually a site from the Winnipeg government, or the Winnipeg, I can't find the right word here. The Winnipeg like city of Winnipeg website that actually tells you where they have planted the trees. So it's like an interactive map, which is pretty cool. Like you can find like, oh, this here in this neighborhood they have these trees, or on this sidewalk they have these trees. So it's pretty neat. Really, I think that entire purpose is really for you guys to get out and explore some trees, and sometimes it might be challenging to identify, but really you just have to get out there and try, because like this, after all, this is a biology class, right? Like that's the best way of learning bio. It's not really looking at notes or whatever. It's actually being out there and seeing what life is out there. Yeah, thanks for doing that, Joel. And Owen, you got pictures. You just have to, yeah, like what I had to do too, like when I wasn't completely sure about like, is this a green spruce or is it a white pine or a black pine, I just Googled it, and then there's so many YouTube videos that help you differentiate between them, and then also different sort of articles that tell you like, hey, this is a black pine or white pine or whatever. It's pretty cool, right? Like it's just yeah, it's just a good way. And now, like, I will always remember based on the experience about how to identify the tree based on like the alternating buds, or if it's just opposite buds, looking at the leaves. So kudos to like Haley and Anna who have handed in already. You probably have seen my tweet. It was so well done because the pictures and how you guys provide the rationale. Kudos to both of you, and I'm looking forward to see all the other ones too. And yeah, so thanks for doing that. All right, so today I'm going to just again quickly continue on here. So this is your tree of life, right? This is the tree of life that we have. I'm just gonna get my pen ready here. Where's my mouse here? So here, this tree of life, you should be pretty familiar with this already. And we have talked about all of these ones, annelids and mollusca, and well, I don't think we've talked about mollusca yet. So this is where we have talked about. Again, the kingdoms, you should be familiar with the different kingdoms that are there, and also the domains, right? Like one way is like one concept you have to know is that can you differentiate between the 5 kingdoms or the 3 domains, and know examples of them. So like if you're like what I want you guys to really have is that after this class, you know, if you go out grocery shopping or go to the zoo, you'd be like, hey, this is a class Insecta, or this is like the class Bivalvia, or this is part of the Animalia kingdom, or this is a fungus, and why it's a fungus and not a plant. That's really the intent of this biology section, right? It's for you guys to understand the life and the differentiation of this, right? So what we're going to talk about here is that we're going to look at the arthropods here. So we have looked into all of the tissues and the symmetry and the body cavity. Now we're looking at really the true body cavity, which is a coelom. But then now we're looking at the differentiation between the embryonic development. So if you remember the difference between embryonic development here is that you have something called protostome, and then you have something called deuterostome. And this is just missing an O here. The deuterostome and protostome is that the protostome actually has the mouth developing first, and then the deuterostome actually has the bum, the anus developing, developing first, and that will differentiate between these two sort of branches, right? And you can see everything after the deuterostome are actually more advanced, and we talked about like your starfish, but everything else that we know, like on the zoo, at the zoo, are mostly deuterostome, right? But then this one big section here, this is Owen's favorite. This is the class Insecta, the arthropods. These are your protostomes. This is where the mouth develops first, when or during the embryonic development. So let's get into that. So the next one we have phyla, that we have true tissue. This is what we're talking about now. We have true tissue, bilateral coeloms, and then now we have the protostome. Again, the mouth develops first, and then now we have segmentation, which we will talk about. But one cool thing about this now, let's just kind of talk about phylum Mollusca first. So whenever you hear about like mollusks, go to the beach, this is really talking about the snails, oysters, and squids, and they're going to be broken down into different classes, right? Remember the Linnaeus order here is that all right, the arachnids, all right. I just kind of made that assumption, Owen. But remember, you should know the kingdom, phylum. You should know all this order, right? Came, class, order, and then family, and then genus, and then species, genus. So that's your order right now. So we have your kingdom, Animalia, and then we're going to look at the phylum, your Mollusca, and then we're going to break this down into your 3 different classes. All right. So I feel like there's a big lag in our YouTube video here. I'm like way beyond here. So major features of this is that the coelomates that are protostomes is that you have your 3 major classes. So you might have heard of gastropods or gastropoda. that's all of your snails, right? That's your snails. So you have like this shell, you have like a slug sort of foot, really like a slug sort of organism. Also part of mollusca are your bivalvia. These are your clams. So if you look at your clams or mussels or like those ones, are your bivalves, and that name matters, right? Bivalvia, two valves. It's like separated into two halves. And then eventually another mollusk is your cephalopods or cephalopoda. These are your squids. And there's a unique structure for all of these. So really the major structure of this is that they have the foot. They're starting to develop these more complex nerve cords. All right. And then they have these really sort of like they have a mantle. So here they have this mantle cavity, and then you can see that this is your snail, and then there's a mantle for the squid as well. So like that's your unique feature that's present in your gastropods. Let's look into your gastropods. So this is class Gastropoda. And what they have is that they have this mantle that's like a shell. So just like your snails, your bivalves, or your squid, they have this mantle. And how your snails move is that they have this rhythmic sort of movement. So have you ever seen a snail or slug move? Your snails, their footing move in this rhythmic sort of like a wave form, and that's how they move along the ocean floor or on the garden beds, whatnot. All right. But you have to understand that not all gastropods have shells. So sometimes you might see just a slug. If you dig up your garden in your backyard, you might just see a slug. That's your gastropod, but without the mantle, that's your shell. Okay. Respiration here is that some of them could be aquatic. So you have snails that live in the water and they have gills. So you can notice that now, instead of just those worms that we have talked about, right? Your annelids, your roundworms, right? Now they have more of these gills that may have evolved to live in the aquatics for longer periods of time to breathe, or if they're terrestrial, they don't have the lungs, but the mantle functions as a lung. So like you can see the evolutionary progression here from just that basic worm to developing more complex structures here of a lung, right? That's really, really important for the survival of these organisms. So that's really what I wanted to say for gastropods. That's really it. Remember, they have this unique foot. So anytime you see a snail now in your backyard when you're digging up stuff, now you know that, hey, they have this foot, and then inside this shell they actually have some pretty complicated structures, and they're hermaphrodites, so they have both the penis and vagina, so they can reproduce. They have both males and females, but they have this lung, the lungs to help them breathe. So that's pretty interesting. Moving on to bivalves. So this is class Bivalvia. So these ones are your clams, mussels, oysters, and scallops, and usually they're quite yummy. So I don't know if you guys are a fan of seafood, but mussels, oysters, and scallops are quite yummy to consume. What they are is that when you're consuming them, you're consuming the whole thing, but really you're consuming that they're like filter feeders. So what they do is that these mussels and clams and oysters and all that, they just sit at the bottom and they let water flow through them, and they filter whatever is in the water. It could be plankton, phytoplankton, and they just kind of consume their food through that way. And then they can expel water to provide them with some movement. And here you can see that they can have some inky substance to form a cloud for protection. But if you look at the structure of this, you can see that these, they're just clams or mussels or whatnot, but they do have more of a intricate structures compared to, say, the worms that we have talked about, right? Like the annelids or like platyhelminthes, right? So here you can see that they do have a foot, just similar to your mollusks in your snails, and you can see that they do have really strong muscles that kind of keep them onto the shell, and then they would have your mantle here, and you can see that there is a lot more complicated structures, right? And if you look at this one, this is a giant clam. Well, maybe I should write it here. This is a giant clam. And you might think about like oysters and clams to be quite fairly small, because you've seen oysters about like this big, right? Giant clam the largest one can span to about 54 inches. So that's about what, like close to 5 feet, a little bit over 4 feet. That's massive, right? And that's your giant clam. And you can see the beauty in this. But if you think about relative to the size of the ocean, right, 5 feet in the gigantic vast ocean is really not that big, right? So there's so much stuff in the ocean that we still are researching and trying to figure out. And here's another cross section of your bivalve. So this one could be your clam, and you can see that there's gills here for it to filter the food, of the water that goes through, and you have the foot that comes out, and then they can use that rhythmic rhythm to move along, right? So that's your bivalves. So just like it's like it can be separated in two separate halves. And then the last one is your class Cephalopoda. So this is your class cephalopod. So Cephalopoda. And then this one you have your digestion, where it has the radula and a sharp beak to attack prey, and then has this complete digestive tract. And then excretion makes use of an anus as well as a siphon to expel waste. So you can see that it is getting a little bit more complicated with all of the way of movement. And your octopus and your squids are exactly the same. They're cephalopods, and you know that octopus or octopi are quite intelligent organisms. So they have this really complex structure as well. So you can see that they have this nervous system that is capable of learning, opening different sort of like cages or boxes that they're kept in. Really advanced, very developed eyes for their, and then even for their pigment as well, right? They can like camouflage themselves. You've seen that in the videos that I've shown you. So these are your cephalopods, right? So that's your really your mollusks. So mollusks are your bivalves, your gastropods, and your cephalopods. Okay, my fingers. And then the next one is that we're gonna move on to, let's go back to our tree of life here. So we have just done your mollusks right here, and then now we're gonna look into your annelids, which are quite advanced as well. So when we think about your annelids right here, these ones are your segmented worms. And so when we dissected that earthworm, that was a segmented worm. And annelids are basically the same, very similar to your mollusks, but they just don't have that sort of mantle. So they have your bivalve, the protostome coelomate, and these ones are segmented. So if you look at this here, so you have your annelids right here, and then mollusks. So annelids would have that segmentation, and then this branches off into your arthropods as well. This is where you have all your crustaceans, like your crabs and lobsters and insects and spiders and all of that. Ants, massive class of insecta. So that's that. And let's go back into your annelids. So really quickly, this is just really brief here, is that your Oleochaeta was your earthworm. So if you study, if you end up taking university, a lot of research actually will be done on Oleochaeta, your earthworms, and also leeches is part of this annelids as well. So Hirudinea, this one, and your Oleochaeta, there's all segmented worms, and we've done this dissection of your Oleochaeta, of your earthworm, and you know that they're in different segments, and you have your clitellum that's right here, right? So some of these diagrams are confusing because right now from this perspective, this is what we were talking about before, right? It looks like the clitellum is closer to this end, but in reality, the clitellum should be closer to your mouth part, right? And we noticed that from last time, and from this diagram, it's it looks like it's closer to anus, but it's actually the other way around, which can be kind of confusing. What it is that when we talk about segmentation, is that I guess a good way of looking at this is just like, where is my cursor here? It is, these worms are segmented, so that means that they are just like donuts stacked on top of each other, and they have different segments, different sections, right? So here is that when we talked about the earthworm dissection, the gases can diffuse across the body wall, and it is a closed circulatory system, whereas some of other more primitive organisms are open circulatory system. And when we did the dissection, we talked about the posterior side, anterior side, and we looked at actually the 5-chamber hearts, right? A heart in the earthworm, and there's also like the nerve cell that went all along the different the entire length of the worm, and they're, because of that, they are found in every sections, right? The segments, right? So you can see that this, we did this last time when we dissected it, but this is pretty interesting. You have the mouth, and then you have your more of the complex worms that are out there, right? And when we talked about the reproduction, we talked about that earthworms are hermaphrodites as well. So they have the clitellum that sort of, create that sexual activity if they wanted to, or they can actually be asexual as well. And they have both the male and female parts, so they don't have to be differentiated between like a male and female worm. They can be both male and female. And this is the reproduction, is that really you can see this is your clitellum right here, and then this is where your sperm, remember that there's this different sections of the segments of the earthworm that would have the sperm duct, and this is where they deposit the sperm into it, and it forms the cocoon, and then that's where the little worms, the baby worms, will come out. So that's how earthworms reproduce. So today we just really talked about your mollusks, and then you have your annelids, which are your segmented worms, and then now we're going to talk about your arthropods. So this is a big section here, is that this is about arthropods. I don't know why my pen is not working, but this is phylum arthropods. This is a big phylum because it includes your insects. We always forget about insects, but insects cover such a massive biomass of the earth. So if you look at this, insects, mammals cover about this many species, but insects, this is about like 5 million. So if you think about insects, it's a massive chunk of our biosystem. And excuse me. And spiders account for a large amount as well. So when we think about all of this, it's a pretty big deal to know about your insects. So when we think about arthropods, Arthropoda is a phylum, and it breaks down into your 3 different classes, right? And all of these ones are segmented, but they have exoskeleton that gives them that sort of outside shell. So one major feature of your arthropods are that they have this exoskeleton made of chitin, and chitin is really just a bunch of glucose molecules, modified glucose molecules linked together, make them really strong. If you think about the shells, if you like ever stepped on an ant or like an insect, there's that crunch, that's your chitin in your exoskeleton. They have to molt to grow, so you can see like they have that shell that breaks off, and then they will grow a new shell for them as they continue to grow. And then now you can see that they have joint appendages, which is a lot more advanced than your worms before. So they have these joint regions, and if you ever look into an insect, they always have these 3 body regions, which is your head, thorax, and your abdomen, right? And we're going to look into that. So when we look at your arthropods, you can see that, look at all of these diversity, right? You have all of these various different kinds, and that's your arthropods. So I'm going to stop it there, and then we can talk more about your each of these. I don't want you to overwhelm you guys today, but I'll talk about these 3 classes next time. And I think Owen, if you want to totally jump in and do arachnids, completely do so, right? I think your knowledge on that is going to be so grand. So I think that's great. But um, if you have any questions about your final assessment or anything, please let me know. Send me an email. I hope this has sort of gave you more of an understanding about the biodiversity of life and the appreciation of like what's out there. Sometimes we forget that life is out like incredibly intricate and beautiful. Go outside and just look at how like plants grow, seeds sprout, um, animal behavior. Totally go out and enjoy that. I think it's always nice to kind of get back with nature, because really nature is right there, right? So I'll see you next week, I guess, because I'll probably see you on Thursday because I'm dropping off the signs as well. So if I don't see you on Thursday, I'll see you next week. But if you have any questions, let me know. So I'll end it off there. See you guys.